Welcome, everyone, to the work session of the Aspen City Council. Today's date is July 24th, and it's 4 p.m. in the City Council chambers. Hope everybody has had a great weekend. Our meeting today is going to be primarily discussing the Lumberyard project, the lottery and priority ballot language issues. So we have Chris Everson here to lead us into this, and we'll just let you take it away.
Thank you, Mayor Richards. Correct. We're here at the work session today to discuss the Lumberyard lottery priorities and the proposed, or I should say the draft ballot language for the bond measure. May I go ahead and share my screen?
Yes, please.
Thanks. So, my name is Chris Everson, Affordable Housing Development Project Manager. We have only the 4 topics today to discuss, but there may be some amount of conversation the council wants to get into related to these topics. By no means expect to have a complete decision and outcome based on this first work session on these topics. The goal is to, within 6 months of the recent agreement that was established with Gorman Development for the Lumberyard project, to provide them with the information that they need in order to move forward with planning for how the project will operate. Those topics include the potential for any sort of work location priority. Additionally, any potential priority based on work type. And also to discuss some of the pieces and parts related to any employer partnerships that you may want to pursue. And again, to talk about the ballot language. And there's only 4 slides here. And so if you want, we can have these discussions one at a time, or I could quickly run through the 4 slides, establish the full context, and then you can sort of go back and talk about each one, your choice, how you might want to do that.
I would think kind of run through the whole series of topics, and then we'll come back one by one.
Quick run through?
Okay.
Sure. So as you think about any of these options, it might be helpful to also think about any of the characteristics specific to the Lumberyard development. Feel free to ask questions about things like that. Any additional research that might be needed on these topics, right? We don't have a full recommendation here today for you, but we could do some research on some of these topic areas. If you have some questions and would like us to dig a little deeper into some of these topics, we can come back. Like I said, we have 6 months, so we've got some time to schedule a future work session to follow up and perhaps offer you some additional information that could shed some light. You may want to consider a work location priority. This was done for the recent Burlingame 3 project, where the urban growth boundary was established as a priority that will be allowed in perpetuity for the initial sales and for the resales. You could consider other boundaries, Aspen city limits. You could consider having no boundaries and just use the APSHA guidelines and say everyone who's employed within Pickens County has equal priority. There may be some other options that you could come up with along the way. Happy to discuss what those might be. And again, some other factors to think about is this only for the initial lease up, or is this for all future lease turnover until the end of time? So that's the work location topic. There's also the work type. You could consider a priority based on the type of work that people do. And some of the examples given are life safety and emergency response, essential services, operational necessity, community resilience, work type that is particularly prone to recruitment and retention challenges, other areas of employment that perhaps provide economic or social impact. And again, for either initial lease-up or possibly for all future turnover as well. So those are some work type priorities, and in your memo, we did give an example of certain sort of jobs that we could further look at when we come back to this. But just to further set the stage, also considering an employer partnership program where we talked about employers may pay a fee to the city separate from the rents related to the units themselves, where those employers receive a priority, or their employees receive a priority in the lottery to get housing, to be first in line for the housing. And again, that priority could be either only for the initial lease-up or also for ongoing lease turnover in the future. And of course, we would need to go ahead and create those agreements with those various employers. We did include a very short outline of a employer outreach program that we can plan to go forward with to start the process of raising awareness about a program of this nature, take further steps in that process to establish program parameters, and then possibly get further into the future and have specific agreements with employers. Some of those, some other things to consider is, would there be a hierarchy? Would an employer partnership priority be greater than an essential services or a emergency services work type priority or a work location priority? And so thinking about that hierarchy and how you might envision that working. And then also, do we want to see a cap on the number of these types of employer units, leaving possibly, plenty of units available for applicants at large as well. So think about what you might be inclined to consider as a cap on the number of units in a program of this nature. And possibly in other areas as well. Maybe you could put a cap on some of these other types of priorities as well, although that's not mentioned here. And then finally, we can read the specific draft ballot language later when we get to it, but just wanted to put that out there that this draft ballot language has been reviewed by Kate, has been reviewed by Jim, has been reviewed by outside counsel at Butler Snow. We've had plenty of back and forth on the topic. So this can still change, but it has been fully vetted, and if you do think it's ready to go, then we're probably quite close, actually.
Okay.
But I can go back to the beginning and kind of initiate some of the discussion, starting with the potential for a work location priority, if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, let's kind of, these things do mix and match a little bit, but let's talk over the big time. I do want to say that Bill Guth is unable to attend our meeting today, and he said he does support priorities for essential workers in education, life safety, and one other main priority. But I wanted to talk a little more broadly about this. For me, part of the idea of partnerships, of bringing partnerships, is to help cover some of the costs or recoup some of the costs so that it can be put into further affordable housing in the future. And while I would like to see essential workers, as we're somewhat defining them in terms of life safety and education and community public services, really, I have a sense that when it's a taxpayer-funded district, they should be working for a partnership for priorities in units as opposed to just, we're going to build it, we're going to take all the expense, and we're going to give you that priority for free. I just don't think it's appropriate. And I think that when we have talked, as I understand it, about partnerships in the past, when partners are all very excited, we need housing, yes, certainly, whether it's schools or hospitals or others. But then when they start talking price, they kind of are gone. They're what, $500,000 a unit subsidy? It's like, no, I'm only on a 3-year lease, you know. So I understand that. And so I think working towards a financial formula that the partnerships would feel reasonable and be willing to buy in with is a critical element of this. But I don't think it's fair to all the other employment types in the community to have an entity that is taxpayer funded and supported, may already be buying units or putting units into work for their employees, that you guys get freebies from the city. But if we were to turn to a Kroger or a ski company or other companies, we'd be saying, yes, you need to pay in to have a priority for any of your units. And so I think part of this discussion really is about what is the purpose of partnerships and what is the purpose of prioritization. And so, again, for me, the purpose of partnerships is to bring in some money that can be rolled over into supporting additional affordable housing. And I think that the fee needs to be something reasonable to an employer that they renew every year. And if an employer loses his lease or doesn't need quite as many units because of AI or something, then they can let that unit go. And it's not a lifetime commitment forever. It can then go to the general public. I think that we really need to have a significant number of units in the general lottery. And so, again, if we're trying to break this apart or perhaps put the pieces back together again, for me, work location would definitely fit under general lottery, that this work location should be within the Aspen urban growth boundary. And if there's units available when no one else has applied who lives and works within the urban growth boundary, they can go to other APSHA qualified employees. And so, you know, I don't know if the town of Snowmass feels like they're successfully have enough in the pipeline to house their needs, or will the town of Snowmass want to have some units here? So that is a greater discussion about work location. I think we all know, especially when you get into couples or, you know, dual apartments, you can have one spouse who works in one direction and one spouse who works in a total opposite direction. And one works in Snowmass and one works in Aspen. We've, you know, ran into that certainly with Burlingame. It's not that both occupants of a couple have to work within the city limits. I think that's how that was settled. But those are my general overall sentiments, and I don't know what that magic number is. Is it worth $3,000 a year to an employer to know he has a unit for a worker that earns below this much? Is it worth more than that? Is it worth less than that? But if you were able to take that unit over a 30-year period, you would regain $90,000 towards other housing. And you would assure some people who want to be assured of their workforce that they have it. And it could eventually get to a point where it's paid off. So I'd like to try to play with the numbers a little bit and work on, again, from my understanding is that everyone's real excited about different sites and cooperation and the Forest Service site from the federal government. But once they see the subsidy per unit, they don't have that sort of cash up front. They're not going to do a bond issue for it up front. And, but we would be able to work with them on an annual budget basis and some sort of subsidy to have the priority for a unit. So those are some of my general thoughts on this. I'd love to hear some feedback from either of you on those concepts.
Well, Well stated. I understand the logic behind categorizing people, but I do have some really big concerns about taking that path, because once we go down it, it's hard to come back. I do agree that work location should be within the urban growth boundary. That makes sense to me.
For general lottery units.
Yeah, for the general lottery units, but yeah, it's going to be a slippery slope. And as far as employee partnerships, as our program grows and ages, more importantly, I think we've got some really serious adjustments that we need to be thinking about too. But I want to make sure we look at every option we've got. And I do really appreciate that the ballot language includes the line without any increase in taxes. I think that's really important.
Yeah, the state requires everything to be in block letters, which makes it a little less readable. I saw the same thing, and I was wondering, without increasing taxes, can that be flipped to the front of that sentence, or is that our bond counsel told us to leave it at the end of that sentence?
We wanted to put it in the front.
Well, I know it's not in the very front of the whole language, but I'm just wondering it within that one sentence in the body.
So I will say that under the Tabor, under the provision that's known as Tabor in the law, it does provide a form of question. The question that's before you meets with that form of question in the sense that it starts with shall city of Aspen debt be increased? That is the language that Tabor proposes ballot questions should be phrased as. There is the ability to change that, and we feel that it would still meet with all of the Tabor requirements and be compliant with Tabor laws if you start the question with without increasing tax. But if you want to be purely consistent with Tabor, again, I think both are legal.
Yeah.
This was the proposed language from our outside counsel. Again, they believe both versions would be legal, but in the sense of Tabor, this is
The norm.
consistent with the language,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
So, you know, I think the question really is, it may create questions that are unnecessary if you word it differently, but we still think both are legal.
Yeah, well, I think those are just kind of random comments that what everyone feels, would rather see that up front, but it is within the body of the question. So I don't know that there's any other way to move that around, because it's actually a single question. It's just a very long run-on
Yes, it is.
sentence. Okay, we'll go back to the original question we were talking about.
It's okay.
And Sam, you're kind of up.
Yeah, thank you very much. For priority of general lottery location, I do believe urban growth boundary makes a lot of sense. It seems like we've had success with BG3 for this, so continuing it. As far as employee leases, I do think whatever is done that way should be a pilot program and not in perpetuity. I'd put a cap of number of years that they could have prioritization to see if it works, because I do question whether it will work in the way that we intend, or who would want to participate and what it would look like. So I would think like 10 years maximum, at least in the pilot level, maybe even less.
And are you talking about that for paid partnership?
Yeah, because I do think this is a new concept, unless someone wants to correct me on that, and for that reason, I don't know what the unintended consequences
Yeah.
might be of this sort of solution, because normally you would just sell it to an employer and it would be theirs, but like the fact that they're
That no one can afford it.
yeah, so what does this look like in practice, and how does it work?
Rent to own.
Well, and the fact that these are APSHA and like working in this like sort of field, it's obviously very important that we have essential services, and then at the same time, it's tough to have your job tied to your home. So like, it's a catch-22 on this, which is why I'd like to test it out, especially since the city is now delving into the prioritization of employers versus wanting to go head first and hope for the best. So I'd want to pilot this sort of thing.
That's interesting. I like that, the reasoning behind that.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of funny. I think each one of us could come up with this essential services list is very comprehensive and really wonderful, and each can be said to. I think one of the ones that I always go back to is RAFTA, and how I wish personally that we could prioritize them so that our public transport could be the best in the world, especially when we're adding people to what will essentially potentially be another traffic jam. So that's one where, like, if I had my way, I wish that they could get some units here to house bus drivers and make, like, see how the pilot fare fee program goes. But what a nice
Yeah.
world and concept if everyone at the Lumberyard worked in the urban growth boundary and got on the bus and everything was rainbows and butterflies in that way. So, but like, maybe they want to participate. So the opportunity will hopefully be there for at least this pilot program, if that's what we decide. Otherwise, I'm not sure what the other questions. I mean, I wish it said no new taxes in parentheses in the title of the ballot question. I feel like that's very important, but that will be advertised plenty. I'm not
Yeah,
super
yeah.
concerned.
Yeah.
We'll keep beating a dead horse on that one. Otherwise, did I answer all the questions? Or?
Yeah, well, we're kind of probably be coming back to a few, but I appreciate that thought on the pilot program. And, you know, I've thought about it myself, and it's like, well, if you're going to start to define essential workers, you know, you'll have to house all the post office staff, so we start getting our mail on time again, and, you know, all the sanitation district employees who don't live here, and, you know, the road and bridge crews, and, you know, mental health, childcare, school. Before you know it, there wouldn't be room for a single middle manager at a hotel or bank. There wouldn't be a unit available for much of anybody. And, you know, I'll just tell a story. We had a priority for some essential workers who had once worked at the 911 call center, emergency dispatch, and then after a period of time, they took another job within the organization and suddenly lost their housing. And it's like, you know, you got in because you're a child care worker, but you decided to take a job as helping your husband start his business. Suddenly, your whole family has to move out, and so you're right, the tie to your job can be a blessing and a curse sometimes, I guess would be best to say it. John?
Well, you know, I just want to tie this in with my previous comments about it being a slippery slope. I'm an artist, and although I have housing, I think there are artists in our community who think that they are essential.
Yeah.
I don't know if everybody feels that way. I kind of doubt it. But I would also point out that there's another profession on this list that isn't represented, and that is journalists are very important to our community.
And I'm not sure I have the whole list pulled up anymore from when I first started looking at it. Let's see. But yeah, you know, it gets pretty tough. You know, where you know, all your ski patrollers, all your EMTs, you know, it's and I'm not the one to say a great chef is not an essential to this town, or great hotel managers, and you're not either, Chris. I realize that, but this is where, again, I look at education and childcare as the Kids First program has taxpayer support to be able to take care of their needs. The hospital has taxpayer support to take care of their needs. The emergency services, firefighters, ambulance drivers, dispatch, police, sheriff's deputy, they're all working for tax-paying organizations, tax-collecting organizations, and they should be our partners, and we should partner with them to a certain number of the units in total availability. I would think close to a third, maybe a half. But with them being in a partnership that contributes funding, I think we can start to see exceptions to the location rule if it's a partnership. I think that's going to have to be understood, because it's, RAFT has always struggled with that. If somebody works for the Down Valley route, do they qualify as City of Aspen driver? It's just things like that. So if it's an employment with an agency, and Aspen Valley Hospital wants a staffer that's going to run the Snowmass Clinic on the weekends, I'm not going to say, well, you don't work in the urban growth boundary. So I think when you get into the employer partnerships, as a minimum, they'd need to work within Picken County or deliver services to Picken County. Can't be a partnership for outside the county. John?
I would agree with Sam. I think RAFT is an essential service that we should do what we can in our power to house, to pick up the slack on what RAFT can't do. Snowplow drivers, anything that keeps our community resilient, like making sure the water comes out of the faucet, making sure your electricity turns on when you flip on the light, things like that. But
Yeah. Well, I think the city has its own funds set aside for affordable housing. We'll need to buy in for some of the staff that it wants to be able to recruit as well. I'm not in any disagreement. And I do think RAFTA generally puts in the bids for Burlingame seasonal housing. Now, this is different. It would be long-term, and they could get some longer-term employees. But I do believe they always try to lease some of the Meralt and the Burlingame seasonal for RAFTA uses, for RAFTA drivers.
Yeah. No, I just want to say again, it's triage. Everyone's essential in their own way. I mean, that's why they're paid money to do a service or like good a service. Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, they wouldn't be needed if they weren't being paid. So that's important. And the reason why I bring up RAFTA again is because, like, I'm thinking of the quotation marks adverse effects of what the Lumberyard might bring to our community, which is potentially more traffic.
Yeah.
Potentially, and for that reason, I think you need to have the most robust public transportation system, but it also could bring more kids, and you need more school teachers and more services to doctors, so I understand that. And then I also want to point out Christine's hand is raised.
I was going
okay.
to point that out too. Thanks.
I don't,
She's a
oh, she's a panelist on this level. I'm sorry, I've been looking at this other participant screen, Christine, my apologies. Please, jump in.
Okay, thanks. I have a few questions and then some thoughts. In terms of the work type priority, one of the things I think we could think about is perhaps where are the greatest needs, if this is a chance to ask for more information. Some of the sectors, the hospital, the school, RAFTA, they have the means to address or start to address housing on their own and have already done that. But are there sectors that have gaps we could potentially address and have bigger impact? And I don't know what those are, or in sectors or smaller organizations or businesses where one or two housing units would be or are very critical to their success. If something like that might be helpful to look at. And then in terms of the work location priority, would this be for, are we talking about all of the units at the Lumberyard, or would this be for a segment?
We're just generally talking about this broadly, but we were talking about units that were not in partnership, that were going to be a general lottery for available units, similar to what they'd have at Truscott when a unit comes open or things like that, being within the urban growth boundary. So that includes all the airport business center and the airport and through Aspen.
Got it. That makes sense, and I generally support that. I do have some concerns about the business partnership idea. Just, I understand the financial side of this, but I also am concerned about this becoming sort of the inequity of which businesses can basically pay the most for this, and the organizations that can't even come to the plate or don't have the representation or money to do it, and what that creates. It might just need to be more thought out, but that's one of the things that comes up for me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All this is just a real preliminary look on our behalf and our staff's. I appreciate your thinking about the greatest needs and gaps, and I think we can do some of that research. It's something that kind of ebbs and flows sometimes, and you think you're taking care of one problem, but then the next one pops up. But we certainly can take a good look at that. The reason I think we should look a little, it was one other topic, it's related to private employers, but it's new recruitment. And we haven't talked about that as a topic. It was on one of your things, recruitment. But right now, on a rental program, if you were to go to APCHA for one of their openings in housing, and there are some on the list for very low-income qualified people are available, they will go through a 10-day period or so where they take applications, and then they give it to the person with the longest work history. So if a auto repair shop needed to recruit 2 new mechanics, or a plumber wanted to recruit a plumber's assistant, they would never qualify for housing until after they'd been here for a period of time, and then hopefully had the longest work history when a unit came up. And that's made it really hard for recruitment purposes in this community. I've always thought that if you hate to say things get complicated, but it's a complicated world. If you created a program where an employer is paying $3,000 a year, $5,000 a year, I really don't know the right number, to know they have a housing unit that they can bring an employee to, and that employee can start working and then finds out, well, actually I'm getting sexually harassed, or actually they're asking me to do a different job than I was hired for. If they were able to buy out that $3,000 or the $5,000 amount, whatever on a pro rata basis is left, they could stay in the unit and continue to work in another job, of course, in town. But I mean, how do you build in employee protections that are in this project? And so being as over 270 some odd units, it seemed large enough that you could have a small number of units that were truly for recruitment of new workforce to the community for specialized jobs that otherwise, again, we just can't fill. But I've heard this is a real issue with our longest employment history priority for all rental units. It makes it really hard for anyone to bring in a new specialized person for their business. So we need to think about that as a category. And I don't know if we can take the total number and say, okay, well, 10% are new recruitment units, and 20%, 46, 50 are available for employer partnerships, or it should be a larger number if it helps with the revenue, and then the rest will be available for general lottery, something like that. It's just hard to me to just talk about it without looking at the numbers and the fractions and thinking about what is the purpose of any partnership. Is it to ensure certain employers that they can get employees, or is it to return funds to the housing fund to create more housing?
Both?
Hopefully both. And, I will tell the story a long time ago when we were working on the buttermilk seasonal housing. That was originally considered by Robert Harth, director of the music festival at the time, and the ski company to be a partnership, that the two would work together and they would be the winter tenant. And then at a certain point in the discussion, the ski company turned around and said, no, actually we decided we don't need to buy in. And we'll just let you guys build at the city. You can be the winter partner, and we're probably going to get half of our employees in there anyhow, without putting in a dime. And so and they did. But they also don't control the other half of the units, and they kind of wish they had them. Mm-hmm. So, everything comes around and goes around. But what I'm saying is that I think it's important that those companies that are of means and might want some priority, we try to create a partnership that they can buy into. That's not, oh, it's a $500,000 price tag, so please walk away right now, versus, we can make this something that returns money for additional support of affordable housing opportunities. And that's kind of how I'd like to see partnerships work. But this is my impression.
So it's pretty clearly difficult to untie these topics completely, right?
Yep.
They're almost inherently tied together. Some quick clarification in terms of the work location priority. Under the APSHA regulations, in order to qualify for APSHA housing, employment in Pitkin County is required. So the priority, if it turns out that you decide to agree that it's the UGB that you'd like to see as the priority, then that provides a priority to workers who, above those who work in Pitkin County but not in the UGB, right? But how then, perhaps, does that priority fit with a partnership employee? Does a partnership priority, is that above the work location priority? And then where possibly would, so let's say you have an employer who's paying a fee to get their employees first in line for housing, but their employees are outside the UGB.
Yeah.
Does that trump somebody who?
No, I think I had said it earlier, but we've been all saying a lot, me particularly, is that if it's an employer partnership, the work within Pitkin County would be the rule, not work within the city limits. If it's a partnership and there's money being paid to reserve that unit as a priority. And see, this is where I'm sitting here, Chris, thinking of one big pie and saying the partnerships here have this sort of restriction because they're partnership restrictions and they have to work somewhere within Pitkin County or providing the services that come to Pitkin County. And there's money being exchanged to be able to have the right to use that unit on an annual basis. This whole rest of the pie is open to general lottery with the priority being within the urban growth boundary. And so, no, I don't see them as in conflict, but I just see this many units are in this pot and this many units are in that pot.
But I'm just trying to point out that the pots overlap. So let me give you an example. You know, what we're not doing is we're not physically segregating these types of units and saying, you know, this floor of this building are employee partnership units, and this floor of this building is solely going to be governed by the APSHA regulations with no other priorities. What we're saying is, let's say it's 5 years from now, or I should say 5 years after occupancy, and the units are all full, and there's somebody moves out, there's a unit available, right? So now APSHA has to hold, there needs to be a lottery for that one unit. You may have applicants who are on an employer partnership agreement. You may also have applicants who are not on an employer partnership agreement. And in either of those cases, that worker may work within the UGB or outside the UGB. So in that case, the developer who's trying to lease the unit on an as efficient timeline as they can, they need to know ahead of time, who should I prioritize above the other, right?
Right.
And so if there is a worker who's not on an employee partnership, but they work within the UGB, but there's another worker applicant here who is on an employee partnership, but they work in Snowmass, are those on an equal level now, or does the employer partnership, does one trump the other? What's the tiebreaker?
Chris, what I see, and maybe I'm oversimplifying it in my mind, is that if at the end of the day, when it starts to close and we get the closings with Gorman on this, there are 40 units for employee partnership, and these 40 units are divided 10, 10, 10, 10 by the ski company, by this person, by the hospital, by the school district. And no matter what, 5 years from now, they only have 10. And if they continue to pay the annual fee to keep those 10, they still have those 10, and they can keep putting their employees in them. But if they let 2 of them go, they would come back to the general pool. or maybe we could release them. But it's more about the number of units, so that unit comes open, and you can say, well, we already have 150 general lottery units filled, we already have, the partnerships units filled, what's left? It's more a matter of where did that person leave from? If they left out of a general lottery pool, it would be a new general lottery pool person. If they left out of an employer's stable, that employer would get to put someone else back into that unit. So I don't see them as overlapping if you have a set number that are available for partnerships, and once they're fully subscribed, and that's it. And maybe someone drops out of that partnership, they close their business, they're no longer going to rent the 5, then you could put out an RFP or lottery for new employers who want to buy the 5 employee units. So I see it more as a numbers set from the beginning, as opposed to moving around all the time.
So that's not exactly how the developer has suggested that we go about this.
Okay.
In your example, I'll just follow your example of 10, 10, 10, and 10. Maybe Aspen Skiing Company is one of those 10, just as an example.
Right.
Then they decide that they only want that to be 8. 2 people move out, or they no longer work there.
Right.
They want that to be 8. Those 2 units need to go somewhere, and if there is not an employer who's in a position to be next in line, those would go out in the general lottery.
Right.
We're not setting aside those 10 units, because come the end of the month, we need to
Rent's
start
due.
collecting that rent straight away. So if there is no one to rent it to in terms of an employer agreement, then it should go to the general lottery. And so the way this is more conceived is all of the units are always part of the general lottery. All that we're providing an employer to, let's say, is a priority in that lottery. So they receive the priority. That's what they receive in return for a fee, right? In the event that there is 3 different employer partners who have employees in that lottery, you don't know which one of those 3 employers is going to get the single available unit this month, right? So there still needs to be a lottery. And then employer A, B, or C may then be at the maximum of their agreement thereafter. And 2 out of the 3 of those employers may still be seeking a unit.
Yeah.
So they need to be overlapping these pots. All of the units would need to be available for the general APSHA qualified population. There's just different priorities in the lottery at any given time.
I guess I see that as one system is how it could be done, but I can't help but think there's got to be other systems, because to my mind, I don't want the project to, over time, become all employer partnerships and nothing for the general public. But it's a matter of how the partnerships are written, so that if it's a partner X and they go from 10 to 8, they need to have given 3 months' notice that those units will be vacated, or that they will no longer be renewing their contract for those units. They owe rent the entire length of the year, and by their employee or by themselves, that they're making a commitment to the project, but it's only X many units in total that are for that purpose. Yeah. And those can continue on for those purposes. It's hard to imagine the hospital getting units and not leading them in the future, or someone else letting them go as employment continues to get tighter. So, maybe if this was more in a graphic that I could understand differently, that how they want to do it, because no, I understand they can't let us units sit empty. They need their rent at the end of the month. Anybody entering into an employment contract needs to know they're on the line for the rent if the person just skips out at midnight and doesn't show up. And that employer can get someone else in that unit. They could get a friend to put an employee in that unit, but they still owe rent at the end of the month.
So the developer being the owner and the operator of the facilities, through the operating entity, which has debt service to pay, has operating costs to pay. They need to know all of that in advance, how the lottery priorities will work, and not in a manner where we're setting aside a quantity of units for employer A or employer B or employer C, and not in a manner where we're setting aside a certain quantity of units for emergency response workers, or hospital workers, or for teachers. Because all of those scenarios run the risk of a unit going empty and that being a risk to the debt on the project, which I don't own.
Right,
Right?
no, I
They do.
understand.
So it's essential for the operating entity to understand its marching orders ahead of time, and in the event that there is no employer partner to rent this unit to, there is no one within the UGB who has applied, then it falls to the general lottery, and then the general lottery, typically for turnover, APSHA applies the work tenure requirement. Typically for a lease-up, particularly with nearly 300 units, and we should discuss this with APSHA, but typically for a large project where we're selling a large quantity of units at one time, or where we're leasing a lot of units at one time, APSHA waives the tenure requirement so that we can get all the units filled. But the notion of like setting aside a specific quantity of units that otherwise go unused if there is no employer partner to fill that unit, we don't have an option that suits that methodology in this case. If the city owned and operated the facilities on our own,
Yeah.
we could tweak it almost however you like.
You
But
know,
we're trying to find a scenario that works together with the developer model.
I understand that if we have not developed partnerships and cannot say we would like this many units to go into partnership with these employers by the end of our 6-month run-out, then they're all going to be general lottery. And they'll all be general lottery with no?
No. All you need to do is establish the priority of an employer partnership generally. Later, long after the 6 months, we have years to forge specific agreements with specific employers that you can then plug into that priority. So you have until the end of time, really, to forge employer agreements.
I guess I'm getting
And those
confused
employer
because you're
agreements-
going back and forth between two words. One is priority and one is lottery. And if these employers are not going to pay just to put a name in a hat and not know that they're getting a unit, that's where I'm saying there would be a set number of units that are set aside for partnerships for us in our pro forma before anyone's moving into it. And if those units have not been leased out and being filled, and with an employer who commits they will pay the rent even if the employee takes a hike, then they'll all be general lottery units. I'm having a real hard time understanding why, you know, if the original lease-up is 40 units that are partnership units, that number should not increase. The rest will all be for general lottery.
Let me try to clarify. When you say there are 40 units that are for employer partnership employees, I think the cap, and I should just move to this topic, I think the cap on the quantity of employer partnership units under the concept that we're trying to propose is, and if you want to use 40 as an example of a maximum, there may be 40 units for employer partnerships. But if on day one, when we're leasing up the facilities, we've yet to forge any specific agreements with any specific employers, those units will rent to the general APSHA qualified population, right?
Makes sense.
So then let's say we come and we've created an agreement with an employer partner. They're going to pay a fee to provide their employees with a lottery priority, or let's say 5 of their employees with a lottery priority. That priority would be in the next 5 available lotteries. So you would need turnover to happen in order for them to have that priority, and they would only pay based on when the workers become housed. They wouldn't pay for a priority that's going unused.
Right.
They would only pay almost in a dynamic way. We had 3 employees housed in 2032, so the fee that we owe the city is commensurate with housing those 3 employees from those 3 lottery priorities that we received. One was a Category 3, one was a Category 4, and another was a Category 2. There's a different fee possibly for each one of those, because we know that a good benchmark for how much of a subsidy it takes to house individual workers could be the fee in lieu that our community development department calculates every few years and updates for us. And if, for example, the subsidy to create an affordable housing unit for a Category 3 employee, the specific number slips my mind, let's say it's $275,000, it's probably more, they're big numbers. If that's the lifetime subsidy of a unit, right, which it's meant to be for not for a unit, but for an FTE, right, you could then annualize that fee, right? You could possibly assume we would like our buildings to last 100 years. I think for accounting purposes, often those types of assets are depreciated over 50 years. Maybe there's some number we could agree on where that subsidy is annualized based on some number of years, and you would pay for your Category 3 employee who was housed through your lottery priority that you received in this agreement, then pay that fee based on that category level. If the priority ends up going unused, then you don't pay, and that unit goes into that unit just automatically, it's not that it goes into a different pot, it just automatically falls into the general APSHA qualified pot. So this is a dynamically managed system of priorities where there is a cap, but it doesn't need to be filled. There can be less than the cap and leave you room to sort of move up and down within that
Yeah.
cap.
I'd like to see that as a program a little more sketched out, Chris, but it sounds to, I'd like to see it established from the beginning and then not be a dynamic program per se after the fact. I would hate to be an employee and be trying to get one of the few units that come up on turnover and be told, no, there's 10 employer contracts ahead of you. I don't see us making contracts with employers after the fact, after the first lease up or after the buildings first open up. I don't see that as being an ongoing process, that it's like doors open now, you want something, you want to get in now, sign up with us, you can have the units, whatever we want to say. But it's not something that after the fact, when someone goes down from 8 to 2, that I want us re-involved in trying to negotiate something so that they have priority over other applicants the one time one unit comes up. That's just, it would be setting up a system where people would always be disappointed with APSHA, because the units are coming up at the biggest project in town, but employer X gets one this year, and employer Y gets one this year. It has to be just a certain number set aside from the very beginning, and then those employers have it. They need to give us notice if they're not using it, and if they're terminating their contract to have the use of that, we could release those units to someone else, but not, I don't want to burden the developer manager with our priority system.
The priority system as described would be less of a burden, but let me explain one other sort of analogy. Let's say there's an affordable housing development of some kind from the past, years ago. Maybe it was 60 units. In the past, one of the things that was done that we don't really do anymore is we take 20 of those 60 units and make them Category 2, to the point where it's like units 1 through 20 are Category 2. And then the next set of 20 units, these physical units are Category 3, and then the next 20 units, the units that are in this building over here are category 4, where the income level is tied to the physical address or unit itself. Nowadays, the way we've done the deed restrictions in a more flexible way, we simply say at any one time, the operator needs to balance the units in a way such there's 20, 20, and 20. But those units can float within the facility. This way, we're not discriminating based on like income level and segregating people physically based on income level. And so the proposed methodology related to the hierarchy of these priorities almost does the same thing. You'll have folks who are on employer partnerships who got into their unit through a priority that their employer paid for. You'll have possibly some folks who are work within UGB, some folks who don't work within the UGB, but they do work within Pickens County. You'll have some folks who possibly got in on a lottery priority based on being an emergency services worker or some type of worker. But those priorities could just float throughout all of the facilities. You don't need to find someone, you don't need to have a 2-bedroom unit in category 3 for a worker who works in the UGB and who is also on an employer partnership. And if you can't find that specific person to meet that criteria, then that unit might not get rented. Instead, this system allows for sort of people of different types, incomes, and work types to be commingled throughout the facilities in a way that provides equity in all but the priority system at the lottery itself, which can be at the initial lease-up when there's lots of units available at the initial lease-up. So if you were an employer and you wanted to get 20 of your workers housed on any one of these priorities, you have a good chance of getting 20 people in, right? 20 employees in. It's just that later, when the facilities are full and we've got only a few units each month that become available, it's difficult to guarantee then those units to any one person, or I should say any one employer, because there may be another employer who has an agreement with the city at the same time.
Can I interject, please?
Yes, please.
This has been pushing me in a direction to at least ask the question of, I don't know if partnerships with employers work for rentals. I would almost like to ask the council to see if we want to just go back to urban growth boundary priority number 1, Pickens County priority number 2, maybe changing the categories if need be. Otherwise, I think we can all move on, because this employer mindset, it just seems too complicated, and it feels like it's filled with unintended consequences. And I mean, I know we work very hard to try to flesh it out, but the way it's been described just seems way more confusing and just roundabout than it's worth, honestly. And especially since we're using money from the general public, that, like, I think, prioritizing the urban growth boundary, a lot of these employers are going to get their employees in no matter what anyway, and it's going to avoid a lot of the things that we've talked about up here as far as concerns anyway. But it's just a thought, just a question, but
I think it's
after...
I do think this is really the first conversation we've had about it.
No, that's fair.
And not that we've been working on it for a long time, but we have discussed the potential of entities being able, with a financial contribution to housing, being able to have some of these units. And I think a lot of people have been looking at that, and they'd be disappointed if we just said, oh, no, it's all general lottery anyhow.
I'm just saying, if it takes multiple minutes to explain how something happens, it's not going to be easy for anyone to understand in the long term. It should be very simple. And I was with you. I thought it was much simpler.
Yeah.
But now I'm realizing this is like one of the more complex things, and it just really shouldn't be. And I think a lot of that chalks up to the fact that we're talking about rentals and not ownership. And
Yeah, I don't know if it's that or not, but it's more complicated than I thought it had to be.
Yeah.
John?
First of all, thanks for all the analogies that you gave us. That helped me understand things a little better. But I think, yeah, there's some big issues that go along with this. Tying your employment to your place of living is problematic for me. We haven't really talked about that much. And the other thing is, again, categorizing people is, it's difficult, and it's once you get started categorizing people, it's going to be hard to stop. And just between those two issues and the fact that it does seem a little complex, I am grateful that we do have time, and this isn't a hugely pressing matter, and this is just our first meeting on it. So obviously we need to work a little more on it, but yeah, there's some issues with this.
Well,
Very
I think it's
serious.
always an alternative to not go to any sort of partnership and just have it general lottery with the only first priority being within the urban growth boundary and a second priority being within Pickens County. And I don't think there are any other priorities other than that.
Just categories, maybe.
And categories and occupancy, one per bedroom.
For example, you could create the priority for an employer partner, and that could be built into the deed restrictions along with urban growth boundary, let's say, as possible areas of priority. And if you wanted to decide on emergency services or some other work type, that could be in the deed restriction as well. But if you then don't go out and create any employer partnerships, then that employer partnership priority never gets used.
Right.
So there's a little bit less of a hazard in sort of creating this as a priority system, because you don't then need to use it. You're just reserving the option to potentially use it. And you could then buy time to have a lot more conversations and outreach with area employers, to have discussions about what the specific parameters and fees would be in any such agreement, right? We have some sort of, proposed methodology here that we would need to get better at explaining, of course. But again, how exactly, the fee is going to work, and are those agreements, you talked about putting a cap on the amount of time that an agreement exists for. I don't think, as proposed, we sort of thought we'd be creating an agreement with an employer between now and like the full life cycle of the development. Whereas, we think of a partnership, we have some partnerships that exist now, right, that are very long-term. And this actually has the opportunity to be sort of chunked out in the term length of those agreements. Could be a 5-year agreement, could be a 10-year agreement, could be annual agreements where we renew those agreements year in and year out. But we're using the same employer priority over and over with multiple different employers, and giving many different employers an opportunity to utilize this priority that you build into the deed restrictions. So we can try to do some research on how to possibly structure it differently if there's some interest there. I mentioned the difficulty with setting aside units specifically for that purpose without having them sort of default to the general APSHA qualified population, because you have to find a way to guarantee that the units will be leased, right? And so we can go back and try to maybe better hone what we're proposing with something that might work better with your suggestions, something that might be simple and more clear to employers. But I would suggest that you maybe keep an open mind to the notion that you could create this priority for employer partnerships and possibly never use it. So think about that as well. I'm going to jump back, though, to the notion of work location, because it does sound like there's a little bit more consensus possibly on having a work location priority, that then if nobody who works in the UGB applies, there could be folks who work in Pickens County who that unit then defaults to. If the work location priority is something that there could be consensus on, is there other research related to work location that you might want to see? I could possibly see if we can look at some of the lotteries from Burlingame 3 and maybe see if we can discern any information from a real-time experiment where that's already occurring on the unit turnover there. I could possibly try to inquire with some employers who are outside the UGB and get some thoughts possibly from them on pros, cons, and likewise from within the UGB. So is there anything that we can do for you to try to provide further information on this topic, or do you feel like you already have enough information to work with this topic?
I think this was the most straightforward topic, so yeah, I'm happy with the way we're proceeding on this.
Yeah, I can imagine there are one-offs where you kind of wish you could include them, but urban growth boundary makes a lot of sense for me, considering traffic patterns and where the jobs are and where the housing is. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the urban growth boundary is the easiest, and then default to all of Pickens County once those units are allocated. I do want to keep an open mind to this and think about how we can structure it so it's more simplified, easy to understand, but again, back to just a limited pool. There's just a limited pool of number of units that would ever be available for an employee partnership, and those employers would need to sign a contract that they will pay the rent if their tenant is gone, you know, that they're getting a priority for someone to get in there. And if that person disappears and then the management company needs the bills paid, the employer is responsible for that employee. And they can put someone else in the unit then once they've just skipped out and are gone, you know. But to me, it's just, maybe it's just the language, maybe it's just semantics of how we're discussing this, but I don't see the pool of employer partnerships ever expanding from the original number. Whatever original number is allowed, that's allowed. Yeah. And then if an employer, for some reason, just says, I will continue to pay the rent till you fill it, but I don't have anybody else, that Gorman can go out and lease it immediately per the general lottery rules. Okay. You know, so the default is always you can fill the unit. You know, it will just no longer be part of the partnership program. But the initial partnership should be it. It should not be that we're trying to develop and manage partnerships 3 years from now, 5 years from now. If our companies cannot look around and say, I am going to need more units over the next 5 or 10 years and be able to make a commitment, then they don't. You know, it's just an opportunity to be sure that your employees get in. And you could be a very large hotel chain and think you're just going to fill it right up with your people, and what do you know? Everyone else got there first, and your employees, you only got 2 employees in out of the 20 you needed, and you missed this opportunity. So, I mean, that's you know, I think it's good if we could recoup some money for future affordable housing through partnerships. But if it becomes something that's too complicated to manage or too complicated for Gorman, or starts to have the general public feel like they're slighted, and they've had 10 units have come up in the past month, but none of us are qualified. It's only for certain people. You know, that would not be a good look.
So as proposed, and I'll use the example of 40 units again, per your example. As proposed, if the cap on the number of employer priority units is 40, then it would never go over 40. Yeah. All right. It could be that only 39 of them are used at any one time, and there happens to be someone, there happens to be one that's not been used. The next available lottery would provide an opportunity for an employer who has a outstanding, or I should say, an active agreement, but they're not at their maximum of their employees, they could put an employee into that unit. So employees who are on an employer agreement could fall in and out of the program, and the unit could then be rented to anyone in the general pool and not having to have that employer pay the rent.
Yeah.
So this
Yeah,
system would
it's
sort of
one way or
eliminate
the
all
other.
of
The
that,
employer
yeah.
either pays it because I'm trying to get somebody in, and then darn it, it didn't happen, and so now please send it to general lottery, I'll pay you for the 6 weeks I didn't have anyone in there. You know, it's got to be the employer who already had the contract that started within the 40. But I think we need to map it out, Chris. I think as much as
Okay.
talk it, we need to do it in a flow chart sort of pattern of
Sure.
how these things evolve over time and what happens to the units over time.
Sure.
John, you had your hand up?
I'm good, thanks.
Say again, like, you keep saying in the simplified way, and that's how I figured it. I figured it's just a master lease for X number of years, the employer paid it, and like when it was done, the council at the time either said, yeah, let's keep it up, or let's send it back to the general lottery and that'd be it. I don't know why it's getting so complicated, to
But
be
it is
honest
because,
with you.
like, just one last try, and we can come back to this at a follow-up work session, and I'll try to map it out more clearly, but there's no master lease. We're not the lessor of the units, right? So the lease would be between the employee and
Gorman.
the development, right? The development entity, which is run by Gorman. So they would be on a lease like everyone else,
Right.
right? It would only be the priority that we've essentially sold to the employer.
Right.
Which is another reason why we'll see what you come back with, why I'm not sure if the rental works for said things, especially when we're not the one leasing it either. It really seems like layers of confusion.
Sure.
Well, maybe we can simplify it and maybe.
we might be able to.
But it's good, it's certainly worth spending a little more time on.
Sorry, I'll say one more time too, sorry, John. What I describe is how it pseudo should work, not how it's going to work.
I understand,
It should
actually.
pseudo work as a master lease, as if that's the sort of like way. And that's why I'm just like, it should not be that complicated, or it just can't be done in the way that we want it to
Yeah.
be done.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see what we can do. John?
I just wanted to reemphasize that I think our program is growing and aging, and we should be looking at every opportunity, not leave any stone unturned.
I agree with that. You know, and,
I would actually
Okay.
also add that there's confusion around the program as we've gone through it tonight, but to me, the most important entity that knows what's going on is the entities that'll be getting these units ahead of time, as long as they understand the program. That's the most important part.
yeah, how you would explain to them, I agree. Well, there does seem to be agreement on the ballot language. And Christine, I'll see if, I haven't seen your hand up now that they have you on my screen, but is there any comments or thoughts or questions you'd like to add?
No, I'm interested in seeing the employer priority come back. Like I said in the beginning, I do have, that one raises the biggest amount of concern for me, and the unintended consequences that could come from a policy decision like that. So I'm open to more on that.
Okay, well, I think it's good that we all have a healthy skepticism, and these are the questions of how it could or would operate. We have more time to keep working on it, and you've heard a lot of kind of legitimate questions and concerns, and perhaps, again, a flow chart type of scenario, so we can look at, you know, options a little differently than we are right now, just verbal layout.
Sure. In terms of the work type priority, is there any information that we can bring back to you? You know, we had the list of different employment types in your memo. Is there any research that you'd like to see done on need related to Christine's question? Is there any further research on this topic that we can somehow help with?
you had varying opinions, I think, at the table on this particular issue.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want us to pursue this, or if this is one of those items where you feel like maybe this isn't the best to put.
Use the time.
Well, and I think to some council members' comments that, putting folks into categorization is maybe a slippery slope that you really don't want to pursue.
Yeah, I don't, I think just bring back what we already have in the APSHA guidelines to take a look at. I think emergency service workers already have a priority when rental lotteries come up, or if they're displaced by government action. But I think just looking at that may actually be what already covers that, and it's not a new item for us.
Okay.
But, no, I mean, I would love to find the opportunity for the agencies that we hear tell us that they are desperate and that they are thinking about buying or bonding or investing in housing themselves, to find a way that this could be a partnership opportunity for them as well. It just might take a little more finagling around the edges and seeing if we can get some real clear, easy to understand systems set up. And so part of this might be that we're all just talking across each other a little bit, which happens in, priority, master lease, what do we, but again, a big part of my interest is seeing if we can, with a larger project, not leave it to chance for the entities that are trying to hire more childcare workers, physicians, school teachers, bus drivers, things like that. And that we still leave a significant, more than half of the units available for general lottery. And if it was possible at all to recoup some money to continue to put into other affordable housing projects over time, I think that would be valuable. But it may not be worth that extra money to employers who'd rather take a risk that they'll be able to be fully staffed this winter or next winter, or that, or they choose to invest in some housing of their own down in El Jebel, and buy a few mobile homes, but I'd love to see our employment opportunities, employers investing on their own as they can, and this seemed like at least a lower cost way for people. If you're on a 3-year or 5-year lease, you don't even know if you're going to be in business in 3 or 5 years. Will that lease be renewed? And so that does kind of eliminate a lot of people from even playing, and they need the general lottery units. All right, is there anything else for us tonight, Pete? We may have beat this dead horse. Christine, I did ask, is there anything else again? But we're going to be talking about this one again for sure when you're back. And Chris, you have a comment?
Last item, you have a regular meeting on August 12th.
Okay.
We need the ballot language to be finalized by the end of the month. August 12th being before the end of the month, it's a great opportunity to bring forward the resolution and have a formal vote on that resolution to approve that ballot language for the upcoming ballot. So if that's good with you, we plan to bring forward that resolution at the August 12th regular meeting. And we'll schedule a follow-up work session to review these topics once more with the additional information that you've asked for.
Yeah, I think everyone was comfortable with the ballot language. And so, yes, that would be good to bring that forward on the 12th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, grassroots, I think that's it for our work session today. Thank you very much.